blockchain technology and and how it's implemented via Bitcoin is like, it's like almost like an alien information drop. Like it's really, really powerful when the accounting rules and everything gets sort of cleaned up and buttoned up and everyone feels safe. Eventually, every treasury will hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, in my opinion. Or I think on May 8th, Trump came out and turned crypto into a football by saying, if you're into crypto, you're into Donald Trump. Well, that put the Biden administration and their campaign into, it alerted their radar that there was a demographic that he was going after. It's kind of an important demographic, actually, because they may be Biden voters getting pulled into sort of the Republican camp by nature of just maybe they're one-issue voters.
This podcast is entertainment, not financial, tax, or legal advice. Views expressed represent statements of the speaker in their individual capacity, do not represent the views of Unchained, and should not be considered investment advice. Speakers often have personal, family, or business connections to Unchained, which may include direct financial benefits. Please see our disclosure at unchained.com/podcast.
Awesome. Ray, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. For the audience that may not know who you are and what you do, can you kind of tell us about yourself?
Sure. My name is Ray Kamrath. I'm the new Chief Commercial Officer at Bakkt. We're a publicly traded firm listed on the New York Stock Exchange. My job at Bakkt is I'm responsible for our commercial strategy, which includes sales, business development, marketing, the client experience, that kind of thing. So very excited to be here on the show, get to talk markets. These are great times in markets. I've been in capital markets for about 30 years. I'm an FX guy. So I come from foreign exchange, worked at Goldman, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan. Most of my experience has been in the early part of my career in sales and trading. And then as electronic trading got more a part of the norm, I had a fair amount of experience building and leading electronic trading businesses. Got into crypto in 2018. Been doing various entrepreneurial projects, some consulting, worked for some different firms. Found myself here at Bakkt, ready to roll.
I like it.
Just started on Monday.
Oh, nice. Very cool. By the way, what happened to your sling here?
Yeah, public service announcement. Number one, I would say don't come to consensus overzealous and bounce around town on scooters, because if you do, you'll break your elbow and a couple of ribs. So I did that yesterday right outside on Congress. Not a good idea.
Did you just did it fall over? Like, what happened?
I hit a pothole.
Oh, gosh.
And did an endo over the bars and smashed into the ground. I didn't get any scrapes or cuts. It feels like I got into a car accident.
So did you know right away that you basically broke your arm?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's all good though. Yeah. Nothing like a 1 or 2 Advil.
Yeah. The fact that you're still here after that is pretty impressive.
Get in the game. Well, but it's just a sling with I'm good. I can do it.
Fair.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, glad you're here still. I kind of want to hear about how you got into Bitcoin, because you have this traditional finance background. Then you said you got into Bitcoin crypto around 2018. Do you remember first hearing about Bitcoin and what you initially thought?
So my love affair with Bitcoin, and I have one, it's intense. It's not dramatic. It's just a deep, longing for it. I'm a big fan, but it predated Bitcoin. So being FX is a macro market. And so understanding money flows, capital markets was part of sort of my background. I got into sound money and the idea of Austrian economics in the early 2000s, started reading about that. When you orange pill Austrian economics, then all of a sudden you realize that the current system is unstable. When timing, how unstable, not clear, but it doesn't make sense. It didn't to me, at least. So I started buying gold for my personal account, for my family savings, and buying, gold pieces whenever I had an opportunity. So I was a gold bug first. And then, like a lot of traditional markets folks who needed to be humbled, which I did. I read about Bitcoin really early. I was introduced actually twice to Bitcoin really early. And of course, being like the global head of foreign exchange at Jefferies and like, I know everything. And I looked at it and I passed. But I didn't really take the time. And I think everyone has that. Everyone has a different story. A lot of TradFi folks have a story like that, or at least if they were introduced maybe 5 or 7 years ago, it was like too good to be true. It's like, oh gosh, this can't be real. So I kind of passed. I stuck to my gold. And then I got reintroduced again. A friend of mine, a very good friend, a mentor of mine, sent me a USB stick and said, everything you need to know is on this. So I was on a flight to London for work, and I had maybe 3 days to do meetings and so forth. And I started I opened up my laptop on the flight over, and I started digging into the white paper and all the different side, notes and Medium articles and like everything that you could possibly get your hands on. And I couldn't stop. Canceled a bunch of meetings. I remember I was in the Ned Hotel, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to hang out here and just like, I'm not doing that meeting. I was too into it. And it was like a 2-day bender on like Bitcoin reading. And I'm like, first of all, I was like, holy shit, how did I miss this? Because then I looked at the price, and then anyway, I got into it at that point. About 3 months later, I left Wall Street and felt that it would, for me, it felt like a once in a lifetime opportunity to be a part of something significant. Wall Street's significant. We play a part in capital markets and capital formation and business, and it's important, no doubt. People give it some shade, but it's actually a really important piece of our society. But this seemed different. This seemed more evolutionary than just important. And so I left Wall Street and decided never to go back, and just, been doing different things to be a part of the space, share knowledge, help businesses grow, build the ecosystem. But it was that gold bug transition in late 2017 on that USB stick that a good friend of mine gave me that got me in, and that's it.
Dang. Yeah, that's pretty cool story. I'm curious, back to your sound money days and on Wall Street, did you talk about sound money and those ideas with your colleagues, and what did they think of this gold bug guy talking about?
It's funny. It's a good question. So at that time I was at Goldman Sachs, and I was a managing director, co-heading FX sales, and was in charge of electronic trading and the e-commerce business. And Goldman at that time was already public. At that time, it was early 2000s, so 2004, 5, and 6. And the street was growing tremendously. Goldman was on fire, tremendous firm, incredible. But everybody they loved the system because it was working for them. There was a couple of folks that knew of a coin dealer in the alleyways of Wall Street and sort of the back alleys. It was 2 floors down, a basement, and he would take checks from Goldman folks. So I would go down occasionally and write a check for $10,000 because I was like, okay, let's allocate more. And then I'd come back to the desk with a jingly backpack with a few, 1 ounce maples. And I did that a few times. And then one time, of course, I tell my stories all the time. I love to tell stories. So what's in your bag? So I told them, and I'm pontificating about sound money and getting grief from everyone. You're insane. None of this makes any sense. And in some ways, they were right. The U.S. economy is a really big economy. I don't think the mechanism for how we structure our economy and how the government is working in the debt and the fiat system is sound, but it's huge. And I think a lot of myself included, a lot of Bitcoiners, a lot of people who are fans of the fundamentals don't realize that it could take decades for change. And so like, I realized right away that I was like an outlier. I didn't know if I was early or what, but I just knew that no one around me thought I had made any sense, including like people who I really respect who are into it now. Gave me a hard time back then. But anyway, so yeah, they probably bought it earlier than me. Because of course, because it only took like 2 or 3 years later, everybody figured it out, and in 2008, when Bitcoin came on, it was my own sort of like, bullocks and arrogance to be like, to pass on Bitcoin. It was crazy.
Fair. How do you think like gold and Bitcoin coexist today? Like, are they competitors? Are they complements? Like, especially with your perspective as like someone that got into sound money via gold.
Well, I own both. I think it's smart to own both. I would say, to answer your question, they're complementary. Nobody knows how things are going to play out. Nobody knows what the world will look like. I think everybody who's into a gold bug or a Bitcoiner would say there's going to be some kind of reset of our monetary system. And if you look at either, like both of them are viable candidates to participating in a new system in some manner. So I like them as complementary. I don't think that they're the antagonism that sometimes zealots on either side. That's kind of like just ego, in my opinion. I think they're complementary.
Yeah, fair. So with all of your career experience, you ended up at Bakkt. Like, what made you want to join Bakkt?
Good timing for Bakkt right now. Actually, an incredible company. There's only two, I don't know if you knew this, there's only two publicly traded crypto firms that are not miners in the US. So our origin story led us to public. So we are public, we're Bakkt in Coinbase. That's a good thing in many ways. It's a tough thing sometimes because the upside of being public is there's an area like it's a high hurdle, right? There's a lot of responsibility to be a public company. There's a lot of regulatory expectation about transparency. So you have to run a buttoned up company. And on the commercial side, that's really good. But if we're still a young company, right? And so we have this, GE should be public. They're big. The public markets are meant for big companies like that, Apple. These are companies that are very well established. Public markets are a challenge for young companies because the rules are not necessarily designed for young companies. There's like a journey. So we're kind of in this interesting spot where we are public. It's great for us commercially. But as a business, sometimes it can be a challenge. Some of the requirements that are on us are expensive. Some of the responsibilities that we have are necessary that we do that other companies don't. So it can be heavy sometimes. So first, the fact that it is the only public company, I would say, outside of the miners, other than Coinbase, certainly attractive. I also think if you look at the portfolio of Bakkt, we have a loyalty business, we have a crypto business, and inside the crypto business, we provide infrastructure for retail brokers. So a company that wants to run a spot crypto business for their retail customers as a brokerage firm, they can do all of the pieces themselves. They can manage all the KYC, the AML, the onboarding. They can, do the custody, the reporting, arrange liquidity for the trades. They can do all that, or they can outsource it to us. And so that's our core crypto business is our brokerage capability. Essentially, it's brokerage in a box. And we have great clients as partners, and we're super proud to be in that space as a silent, sort of quiet partner to a lot of great brands. And that's exciting. And I think there's tremendous amount of room to grow that, not only with have more clients that look like ours, but also change sort of our product lineup and do more things and attract different types of clients. So I like that brokerage piece a lot. I'm super excited about that. We have qualified custody with NYDFS as our regulator. That's a rare thing. There's not a lot of NYDFS qualified custodians. We launched that in November of 2023. That's a tough business in the sense that it's a serious business to be regulated by the NYDFS. So I love that. I believe that we're moving into an institutional cycle, and qualified custody is important, and in some cases will be mandatory. So that's a great piece that I like as well. And then there's a growth mindset in the company. And so we're working on a bunch of different projects that are adjacent but complementary to custody, stuff like trading. We're launching a trading platform, which I'm happy to talk about in June. And we're going to be sort of building that out a little bit. And I think all of those pieces, plus the growth mindset, the fact that we have great regulatory profile. I mean, we have 50 MTLs, a BIT license, a trust license from NYDFS, broker dealer. Like, we have all the pieces to really be a meaningful player on. And in some way, in some markets we are, but like I'm talking about a really big player in the space, and just the opportunity to sort of lead that business and lead that strategy and the great teams.
Yeah.
It's too compelling not to say yes.
That's awesome. Yeah. You talked about how this might be an institutional cycle. Can you kind of elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the space, there are many institutions who are primarily servicing retail investors. And if you look at the way, and that's unusual actually, like a lot of times in my history in markets, the institutional market comes first and then they open it up to retail. But due to like the nature of crypto and regulation and how different it is as a capital market and an asset class, it started out retail. And it's, if you look like, for example, the trading businesses, and also I'm going to give myself a segue into something that we're working on. So like the trading businesses and the brokerage firms, they call themselves exchanges, but they're really brokerage houses. So like all the household names are, they call themselves exchange, but they're really brokerage firms for retail. And I make a distinction. I say that because the custody of the asset, the settlement of the asset, the trading experience, all are in the same vertical, in the same brand. In institutional markets, you usually see a separation of trading venue, clearinghouse, custodian. All of that gets intentionally separated. And you see a more open marketplace where the institutions are encouraged to trade with other people. So like all the parties that are in servicing institutional clients are very open architecture. Like, for example, in foreign exchange, you could have a prime brokerage relationship with BNP Paribas, but trade with 30 different banks. And it's like, you don't just trade with one bank. You have to, like, they have a requirement to trade in multiple places, spread the risk out, and so forth. And so there's a lot of opportunities right now in the institutional space that are all supported by just the evolution of the asset class, right? Like, so particularly the last 2 weeks, I think the last 2 weeks from an institutional adoption perspective are maybe the most important 2 weeks in the last couple of years. We started, I think on May 8th, Trump came out and turned crypto into a football.
In this frontier moment, Ray is talking about Bitcoin now becoming a political football. Each day that goes by, it sounds like he is increasingly right. At the end of 2023, Unchained actually surveyed over 400 investors across the US to learn about their current Bitcoin positions. Respondents had to be between the ages of 18 and 78 years old and have at least one investment account. What we found was very surprising to me. From the survey, 55% of the 400 self-described investors owned some Bitcoin. While most probably own very little, there's still a critical point. Bitcoin is now something that many Americans use to store wealth. Politicians that decide not to embrace Bitcoin could be hurt by this growing, unique cohort of voters. And now back to Ray.
By saying, if you're into crypto, you're into Donald Trump. Well, that put the Biden administration and their campaign into, it alerted their radar that there was a demographic that he was going after. It's kind of an important demographic, actually, because they may be Biden voters getting pulled into sort of the Republican camp by nature of just maybe they're one issue voters. And so that scared the Biden administration. And all of a sudden you started to see a bunch of stuff happen. You started to see a break in the Democratic Party. SAB 121 was approved in the Senate. I'm not sure where that will go. There's still a veto threat. It's possible that it's vetoed, but it's certainly to see a break by, I think it was 11 Democrats voted in favor of repealing SAB 121. Then FIT 21, the whole, the industry bill passes, I believe, the House with 78 Democrats supporting it. No one would have guessed that 5 months ago. So crypto is like a football now. What does all this mean? If the regulatory uncertainty and the fear of being punished by the regulatory apparatus because there's ambiguity disappears, there's more institutions coming. They all want to come, but they have real responsibilities as an institutional provider. It's not like whether I don't have the same requirements when I'm buying for myself as if I was working for a company. So for many institutions, the move that's happening right now where the risk of participating is going down is really important. So I think we're moving in that institutional space. I mean, you go back further, you could say the Bitcoin ETFs, now we have Ethereum ETFs. There's just been a whole series of things that are moving in the industry's direction. So I think institutional adoption's happening, but we haven't even begun. I mean, it's not even in second pitch of the whole baseball game, I think.
I like it. Yeah. So do you think this political trend of embracing Bitcoin is something that will continue? It seems like over the years, people have said, the government will ban Bitcoin. It's too good to be true. But now it's they're all converging on potentially trying to support it, at least as of right now. Do you think it's going to get more and more prominent?
I wouldn't characterize it. I would disagree with the way you characterize it. I wouldn't characterize it as an embrace of Bitcoin. Personally, I don't need the government to embrace it. I think they will eventually out of necessity. So, they may adopt it as part of monetary policy. They may adopt it out of geopolitical security policy. There could be a number of reasons for the government or the state to really get into it. All I need is ambivalence. And the fact that it's a political football, I think, and hopefully that trend continues, means that they're just de-escalating what started with choke point 2.0, right? It was hey, we're actually going after it. I think we've just retreated to, I don't want to go after it because I can't, and I'm not going to support it. And then let's just try to win the votes on some other basis. I think that's where we've gone. But for me, right now, that's good enough. Yeah, I think we'll get to a place where they're going to get forced into it. The game theory would suggest that. But I'm happy right now with just leave it alone. And then, some clarity will be helpful, which I think is part of leaving it alone, is allowing that. There's so many people in the space, in the industry in our industry that are lobbying, Congress, and they're doing a great job trying to help Congress create real, meaningful legislation. There's a couple of associations that are just doing, really good work. And if moving to a neutral state is all we need to let them do their job, right? Yeah, that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely good that they're walking back, kind of bad regulation and stuff like that. So it's good. Yeah, it's very interesting. What do you think? I always like to ask traditional finance people this question: how do you think of valuing Bitcoin? It's an asset that has like no future cash flows, unlike almost every, any sort of equity or bond. So like, how would you think of actually trying to like value what a Bitcoin is worth?
So that's the part that gets a lot of people wrapped around the axle a little bit, like a shoelace around the axle. They just can't get over that. Like, first of all, to me, Bitcoin shouldn't have a cash flow, right? Like it's the only like properly and permanently deflationary asset. Assets require yield because they're part of an inflationary system. So you like by nature, they have to have that. And then we measure their richness or dearness based on whatever yield they're generating against a perception of inflation. Bitcoin is by design like outside of that system. So it shouldn't have. You're actually like, I'm not saying you shouldn't. Like there are really emerging, particularly lately in the last like six to 8 months, there's new ways to generate yield. So I am supportive of it, but at a base case, it doesn't need to have yield. There are safe, responsible, good ways to do that, to get yield from Bitcoin. And I think the industry is really like adapting fast post FTX and some of the other stuff that happened during that time period. So I'm bullish on yield for Bitcoin holders. It is collateral. So like you should be able to generate some yield off of that. I'm just saying you don't need it. And then that's how I would start the answer to your question. And then for me personally, it doesn't need evaluation, which like I'm going to get shade for that, like because it's like sounds so, I would say juvenile to be like it doesn't need one, but it doesn't for me. Like I'm not selling it. I know it's like buying, Manhattan property on Fifth Avenue. It's, 75 years ago. It's like, I'm not selling that thing. So I'm good with it. I have no idea, right? I just know it's up, right? Like I just know it's up and it's dear. It's, there's going to be a limit to the supply and I have some and, and people who hold it will be glad they did. So I don't get too wrapped up I don't think of it as trading. I would never trade it. I'm a trader by background, and it's the one thing I'll never trade in my life.
Yeah, very, very cool. You talked earlier about this idea of like a monetary reset. When that occurs, or if that potentially occurs, at some point in the future, like how do you think that changes like financial markets in general? Like do valuations come down massively? Do public markets change? Like how do you think about that?
It's an impossible question to answer because you'd have to, in order to answer that properly, you'd have to have a good idea of what the reset catalyst will be, and then what would be the actual mechanism to reset it, right? Like nobody knew that Bretton Woods was going to happen and what the effect would be until it happened. So I can't really answer that, but I can give you some general feelings, which are, it's probably going to be an environment where the U.S. is not the dollar is not the reserve currency anymore. I feel it's probably likely. It's kind of run its course, in my opinion. I don't know when that will be. I mean, it could be another 30 years for all I know. But at some point, we won't be the reserve currency. That's safe to say that because nobody's ever been the reserve currency forever. So it's like I'm not on a limb there. But that does have an effect on us as Americans. So I think there will be an adjustment period. I don't think the dollar's going to collapse. I'm more of a milkshake theory guy, which basically, it says we're just going to we'll soak up all of the fiat value into the dollar and then it'll, something will be reset. So I don't think that I'm not a big believer in it's going to collapse theory. I think it'll be more of just constant debasement. In the near term, there will be an adjustment externally, probably more than in the U.S. in U.S. markets. But then after that, we'll have a big adjustment. I don't really know how to answer it other than it probably means the U.S. dollar has less significance than it does now. And the effects that part of like when I get asked that question, it's usually like they want an economic answer. I think it's more like social and political and geopolitical. because is really like going to end up being more important. Because when we lose the significance as the reserve currency, our ability to project power globally changes. Our ability to maneuver events in our favor as a nation state changes. So I think it'll be more of like a geopolitical, social change than it will be economic.
Yeah.
So it's on some level that's somewhat optimistic, because I'm also a libertarian and I'm anti-war. And so like it's helpful if we're doing a little less of that power projection.
Yeah, that's fair. So basically you're saying there's going to be a shift of power, but it's also going to be more of like a decline in power, maybe from like large nation states.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, the United States has been, the strongest nation, holding everybody together, global policeman. And that's, you like it or you don't like it, it doesn't matter. I just feel like we're coming to an end.
When was the last time your spouse made a Bitcoin transaction with your keys? Unchained Signature is a private client experience designed to not just make you a Bitcoin hero, but to ensure your loved ones are comfortable managing Bitcoin wealth. With quarterly security meetings, personal trust, and IRA accounts included, on-call technical support, a discount on trading fees, and more, Signature also includes invites to Unchained exclusive events featuring speakers like Tour de Meester, Peter St. Onge, and Parker Lewis. Sign up for Signature today at unchained.com/signature to turn your family into Bitcoin legends. And now back to the show.
To that, and I don't know what that'll look like. Yeah.
That's fair. We had a question from this guy on Twitter. His name was BitsGap. He said, which countries will influence the current Bitcoin market and why? Do you have any insight there?
I think the US, without any hesitation whatsoever. The US is the largest capital market, bar none. We have the structure of the US. If you look at sort of the way the SEC and legislation has been set up in the United States for the investment business, the legislation tries to push retail capital into the hands of institutional managers who are then regulated by the SEC. Other nations don't have quite the level of, like, I would say, the web of regulation forcing that change. So in the United States, the advent of the ETFs being approved is single-handedly one of the most important things for Bitcoin, because now the largest capital market in the world has a traditional method of asset allocation into the space. Now, you could say that the Bitcoin ETFs are, like a Supermaxi would say, that they're dumb, like they're not the real thing. Why would you ever own that? Okay, well, fine, you own the real thing. Maybe my mom doesn't, right? My mom's 87. She's got an investment advisor, and maybe she's not comfortable, having a nano in the back, in a safe in her bedroom. Like, maybe everyone here would, but like my mom doesn't like that. But now her capital is going to be put to use in the space. So you can like that, you can not like that. There is now a highway system from the largest capital market and savings pool in the world, in world history, into the space. And it hasn't even started. I mean, straight up, like, Bitcoin ETF is just the beginning. We're going to get leverage ETFs. We're going to get index ETFs, actively managed ETFs, and all of that, that whole, that's what you had asked earlier about institutionalization. Like, it hasn't even, like, this is now just, the party's just getting started. What does that mean to a core, like, maxi Bitcoin holder? It just means the price is going up. So if you don't like it, like, I get it. It's not going to change anything, but you're going to benefit from it, So I don't know. I get it. Like, I wasn't a fan of the ETFs. When I first started thinking about the space, I'm like, oh, well, that's antithetical to the whole concept. But, like, perfection is the enemy of the good, right? If Bitcoin gets adopted and a reasonably large percentage of holders are through sort of structured products like an ETF or asset management or something like that, okay. I mean, you want to get to 500,000 in Bitcoin, you're going to need that energy. And so I think it's all complementary.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree. I think like ETFs are kind of top of funnel for Bitcoin. It's like everyone wants some of the number go up technology and they just want to get exposure at first in the easiest way possible. And I guess for older people, that have a lot, millions of dollars in their, Charles Schwab or Fidelity account, it's kind of easy to just click buy there, at least to get started.
What it also does, so this is, we're here in Austin, Texas. This is my third or fourth consensus conference. And I was having breakfast this morning with a prime broker in crypto. And I was laughing because I was recollecting that in my first couple of conferences, I couldn't believe the environment. So my first conference was in late 2000 or early 2018 after I did my whole, London sort of thing. And I remember going to the first couple of conferences and people were yelling at TradFi folks, right? Like there'd be like a little older, maybe they had a jacket on, which is like crazy, like they were, like they just looked like they were from like Wall Street, like, and I did, right? And they'd yell at me. Like I remember like somebody from Citibank was speaking at a conference in New York and it was like a proper crypto conference. And like a couple of like libertarians were like yelling at him, and I'm a libertarian, but it's like, they were like giving him, get out of here, Wall Street, like all that stuff. And like, that was like 2018. I was sitting at a table this morning over breakfast with somebody who runs capital markets at a prime broker in crypto. And we were discussing ways to squeeze a basis point out of the system. Like, how do you optimize for capital and balance sheet and leverage? And we were having a conversation about like maximizing prime brokerage and balance sheet, and literally and I started laughing, and he was new to the space, relatively new. And I started laughing. I'm like, we're talking about a basis point here. Like, you wouldn't believe how far, like for me, I just felt like I was in the twilight zone, because what's happening with all this institutionalization is it's bringing in like new folks. There's new, like TradFi needs to be fixed, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing to learn. That's ridiculous. Right. And so what we want in our environment is the best of what we've learned in TradFi and merge it. Like, I'm an evolutionary, not a revolutionary. And some people don't agree with that, but it's just come a long way. Right. Like, and and when you come to this conference at Consensus, I think the TradFi Wall Street folks have learned to blend in, but the conversations are very different. They're very like professional now. It's really cool, actually.
Yeah. These conferences are so interesting. I was at one time, and I was at the booth, and had one guy came up to me. He's like, "Yeah, I bought drugs off the Silk Road. Now I'm like, have like $50 million worth of Bitcoin." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then the next guy would be like, "Yeah, I'm an energy executive in England." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And it's like the same people coming up to you, within 30 seconds, and they're just like,
Was that recent?
It was in Amsterdam, at least maybe last year or 2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. Weird.
It's a great vibe. There's a great confluence. It's like we're at the crossroads,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's insane. I know Bakkt and Unchained have a partnership. How do you think about like the idea of, individual custodians, like, single off, they're the ones holding the keys, or like the network of keys concept where like Unchained holds a key, Bakkt holds a key, and maybe another person holds a key? Like, how do you think of those two, ways to custody Bitcoin and digital assets?
So I think it's kind of like our discussion about owning Bitcoin or owning the ETF. Like, there are different people who have different preferences, and you can take an approach to be dogmatic, and say full self-custody, hammer your seed phrases into a titanium plate and then embed them in your thigh, like, whatever. It's like crazy, like what we did, and some people do. And I'm not saying I do or don't do that, but you can go that far, or you could say, look, there are different people have different preferences, and institutions have in some cases, a requirement for qualified custody. Some people will want to do full self-custody. And I think the collaborative custody partnership that Bakkt and Unchained have is incredible, because it is literally like a whole new way of doing something, and it blends some of the confidence and professionalism and that you might get out of a qualified custodian that we have at Bakkt. So, like, you know, we're holding one of the pieces of key material. So, but we're a publicly traded firm. We have NYDFS. We're buttoned up. Like, that's helpful in a lot of ways. It helps you feel more safe. Chain of custody and transition, you know, and that kind of protection over time. Like, you're not going to lose the nano that you buried in, you know, in the backyard, like, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, so some people, like, I know a lot of people who are like, I love Bitcoin. I'm going to just leave it at the exchange. Well, that's not a good solution, actually. Like, leaving it just at the brokerage exchange or brokerage house is like the worst of all solutions, right? So if we can move away from that into choosing between pure self-custody, qualified custody, and collaborative custody, like, and make those the choices for everyone, not just like retail, but for everyone, then that's a combination. So I'm a big fan. We're stoked to be a part of it, and to be your partner in that. Like, so it's a great product. I see it scaling.
Yeah, it's great to hear. So I guess your view is like, you don't see them necessarily competing. It's more of like, there's room for each of those solutions, just depending on who the person is or who the institution is that's trying to hold the Bitcoin.
I mean, part of that is my personality. Part of it is just a fact. Like, human beings have different preferences. They have different feelings of risk. And I think, you know, both Unchained and Bakkt are service providers in the space. And if, you know, we can choose to be dogmatic, or we could choose to be responsible, but offer varying solutions to different preferences. And so, you know, Bakkt, I can speak for Bakkt, like, we're a very responsible company. We have our own ideology and belief system about security, professionalism, regulation, how things should be done. But we also are here to serve people. That's our business. And so recognizing that people have different preferences just allows us to be a more meaningful partner to more people.
Yeah. How do you think about like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as well? Like, how do you view that dynamic?
Are you asking Ray, or are you asking Ray, the CCO of Bakkt?
Maybe both.
I think that I am, as a personal investor, I am more comfortable with Bitcoin, probably because it's just, I understand it more. I've done more work on it. It's possible that if I was a little more tech savvy and I understood some of the value proposition better of some of the other layer ones like Ethereum and Solana, like, I understand them, but not at the level Bitcoin is pure sound money in digital form.
In this frontier moment, Ray is talking about Bitcoin being pure sound money in digital form. What is interesting about gold is how imperfect it really is. Civilization is getting more and more efficient and more productive at mining more gold. If you assume a 2% annual supply growth rate in gold, then humanity mined more gold in the year 2023 than all gold ever mined from 3000 BC to the year 1800. With the same assumption, gold production leaped from 36 tons mined in the year 1800 to about 3,000 tons mined just last year, a 100x increase in global production. So yes, Bitcoin is actually pure sound money. We've never seen a monetary asset this scarce. And now back to Ray.
Right. And like, as we talked about earlier, like, that was my background and passion, and still is. So I get it. And so, like, for me personally, like, I like to do things that I understand. I like to invest in things that I get. I get Ethereum and Solana and, you know, Avalanche and like all the others. Like, I understand them. It just doesn't light me up personally. From a business perspective, it's not like, I don't have a preference. You know, in other words, we're here to support Bitcoin, of course, because it's the first blockchain-based, digital asset. It's not for me to decide whether a new layer one is going to have broad commercial appeal or not. It's for me and our company to decide whether there is broad commercial appeal and demand, and how can we best service our clients who have that demand. So I don't really have an axe to grind from a business perspective, except as it relates to how we as a responsible business can serve those needs, right? Like my axe is more about how and can versus should. Like, in other words, like if there's a layer one that people are like the industry and the marketplace is deciding has commercial appeal and is adding value, like who am I to say? Like, our conversations are more along like, are we allowed to do that? How does that fit into our regulatory compliance envelope? That kind of thing. Like those are the questions that we ask.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Where do you see Bakkt in 5 years or so?
It's a good question. Well, we're in an interesting place in our timeline. Like I had mentioned, we're public. We've gone through some leadership changes. We've got a big vision. We're building out a trading venue that will be attached to our custody business. We have the brokerage business growing. I just know from my perspective on what that vision is, to give you the shorter answer. I mean, I talk about the vision all day long. Free advertising, why not? But there's so much room for this company to grow. And where it grows, and I just know that if I were to bet in 5 years, it will be a lot bigger than it is now. We have so much capacity to do stuff. The space is growing. The wind is at our back. So I'd like to think from a market, I'm not supposed to give market cap expectation, just a lot bigger. There's a lot of room to grow.
Cool. Yeah, good to hear. What about Bitcoin? Like, where do you see Bitcoin in 5 years?
I don't make projections. Because remember earlier, I said I didn't value it. Yes. I mean, I value it. It's dear to me, but I don't even personally put valuations on it. Just like it's going to be higher, right? I'm a big fan. This is my big fan and I don't know exactly the ratios. Have you heard the research report that it came out about 2 years ago, and it's a gem. I'm hoping it's true. I read it once or twice, but I use it all the time when I'm at like dinners and family and stuff. You have a portfolio of $100, and you have $100 in the S&P 500, and you have a portfolio of $98 of cash and $2 of Bitcoin. Maybe it's $4, maybe it's $2, but it's like a small amount. And that portfolio of cash with a little bit of Bitcoin outperforms the S&P 500 portfolio every single time over any 4-year period you want to like project. So like, that's what all I need to know is that, right? Like, and then where it goes from now, it just will be a lot higher. It's interesting. Like, I don't get as bullish, like euphoric. Like, I mean, really, like it could go to 1 million for I know, but I'm not going to sell it. It's really, to me, like for me personally, it's like, it's not for me. It's for my kids and grandkids. So it's like, I don't know. It's going to be more.
Yeah, fair. What about, do you have any opinion on like passive flows in Bitcoin? I feel like that's been a kind of a hot topic recently with like MicroStrategy potentially going to get added to the S&P 500, and then, everyone kind of passively buying the S&P 500. Maybe MicroStrategy keeps going up. Other companies copy MicroStrategy. Do you have an opinion on that?
I think it's genius. Yeah, I think Michael Saylor is a real revolutionary guy. Like, I mean, I think MicroStrategy is an incredible company. Not giving you investment advice, but it's an incredible company. I think the strategy that they're deploying is super interesting. And it's possible that a vortex, like you just described, like happens. So do I think others will adopt it? I don't know. I do think that from a treasury management perspective, given, kind of that portfolio comparison that I just did, however that is true. I mean, at some, I don't know if it's exactly true, but it's like close, as my dad would say, close for government work. It's close enough that when the accounting rules and everything gets sort of cleaned up and buttoned up and everyone feels safe, eventually every treasury will hold, Bitcoin on their balance sheet, in my opinion. It'll be a part of prudent, it will shift at prudent treasury management. So that's all I think that MicroStrategy is doing. They're doing it probably more aggressively than what will be the norm in the future. But I do think Bitcoin as a part of treasury management will be ubiquitous.
Yeah, I agree with that. What's something that you believe that you think a lot of Bitcoiners would disagree with?
That I'm Satoshi.
That's correct.
Just a guy from FX who's in the space. That was actually, I could have left you there. Let's see. That's a good question.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this one. What do I think? That I believe, well, to be honest, I think I may have already said something. Like there's been a couple of things that I've said. I'm a little more pragmatic than I think. Part of it is because I'm in the service industry in the space. So pragmatism is sort of a requirement on some level, different varying degrees of pragmatism. But holding space for other coins and other opportunities and stuff like that is a fair amount of like the maxi in me cringes when I say that stuff like that. So maybe it's that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Last question, we can probably close it out. What do you think is the biggest risk to Bitcoin?
I'm pausing not because there's two ways to interpret my pause. One is he doesn't have an answer, and two is there's lots of risks. I think there are a lot of risks. It's hard to pin down. I really believe that blockchain technology and and how it's implemented via Bitcoin is like, it's like almost like an alien, like information drop. Like it's really, really powerful. And the risk to me isn't that it won't develop. The risks are about timing. I think given enough time, Bitcoin will do its thing. The risks are more about like when. Most people that are in crypto, I think they're almost like looking at it wrong. It's going to happen. Like we're going to have massive continuous growth over a long time, but I just don't know whether I'm going to see it. Probably, like I'm betting that I would, right? But it could take a while, and I'm not enough of a computer scientist to speak to, but stuff that I don't really fully have my head wrapped around, nor probably will be existential threats like quantum computing and stuff like that. Things that like ask other people, they're going to give you better answers, but there's probably risks out there that like I'm not qualified to like say that are like more computer science related than anything. But to me, it's like the thing that keeps me up at night is like when, not like if kind of stuff.
I guess that makes sense coming from the gold world, waiting a while.
Yeah, it's taken a long time, actually. I mean, I'm a little bummed out that gold's only, where it is. I mean, I wish it were a little higher, but it's the most manipulated market in the world. So that's what you get.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, Ray, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. Is there anywhere that the audience can go to learn more about you and Bakkt?
Sure. Bakkt.com is our corporate website. I think my Twitter handle is @Ray Kamrath. I don't really tweet there, to be honest, although I probably will start doing more of that. And, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, Ray. This was great.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome.
Thanks.